Welcome back to this side quest of the quest for the bestest. It's the podcast where we normally take a look at old movies, but this time, for this next couple months, we're going to be taking a look at all the 2022 nominees for Best Picture winner as chosen by the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences, or whatever it's called. My name is Timo. I'm joined, of course, by Tucker, Tanner, and Abram, and today we are talking about Jane Campion's film, The Power of the Dog, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, and Cody Schmidt-McPhee as our four main characters. It is a Western film. It is many things, I think, and I'm so excited to hear about it. I'm so excited, in fact, that I think that this deserves no housekeeping, no falderall. Let's dive right into this film immediately. I want to know your thoughts right now. Give it to me, or I'm going to have to maybe do some sort of Western mean action towards you to extract it.
A shooting, a whipping, some sort of...
What do they do to bulls?
Branding.
That? I was thinking of something else on the bull front, but tell me what you think of the movie.
Oh, castration, yeah.
On that note, I will go ahead. On that note, I will go ahead with my thoughts on the film, because I'm the only one cool enough to have watched every single Best Picture nominee now.
Already.
I'm cooler than all of you, and I can compare them all in my mind without letting you all know what I think. But I'll let you know what I think about The Power of the Dog. I really, really like The Power of the Dog. I think this is one of the films that is a presumed winner for that award this year, and I think it deserves it. Originally, before I watched it, I was a little hesitant. I'm like, okay, we have a Western going into this, that is a period piece. This is, it's somewhere, it's 2 hours and almost 30, or it's 2 hours and 7 minutes, I guess. That's not too crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty normal.
It's long, it's a period drama, stuff like that. I was like, okay, this could just be a drop in the bucket of Best Picture winners, potentially. But coming out the other end of it, I really, really enjoyed it. I think this movie has some brilliant stuff. I think it's very understated, but in the same way, it conveys so much if you're willing to look into to the characters' actions here. I think they're really interesting. I think this is a beautiful looking film. Probably one of the best looking movies I've seen as of late, and maybe ever. We'll get to. I'd have to look back into my own film
all
watching.
Movies.
I have to look into all movies, but certainly one of the most beautiful looking films that I've seen recently. And I think Campion does a lot of great stuff behind the camera. I think all the performers do a fantastic job in front of the camera. Yeah, I'm excited to get into the minutia of this film as well.
Okay, truly. Tucker, what do you think about it?
This is an interesting film because I'm on the same side as Tanner, but the scale has shifted significantly downward because while I think this is a very good film, I frankly do think it is kind of just a drop in the bucket of Best Picture winners. This film is very understated, but personally I feel that that's to its detriment. A lot of the start of the runtime in this movie, the first 45 minutes to an hour, are so understated, they don't really feel that important. And because of that, it's kind of like this movie feels like the start of an interesting story. It starts to gain steam as near the end, as things start happening and characters start meeting and conflicts are started and resolved. But because so much of that runtime to me feels underutilized, I didn't feel like I was getting enough out of these characters to really care. That being said, it is obviously well made. I think the actors are great. It is well directed. It is a gorgeously shot movie. It is high bars on all the production fronts, but in terms of pacing and how that ends up playing into the overall feeling of the story, I was a little underwhelmed, and therefore I don't think it necessarily stands out other than being a very good modern Western.
Okay. Abram, your thoughts?
I didn't know what this movie was until like 3 hours ago. And so I had no expectations going into it. And I I think this movie is stunning. This is probably the most engaged I've been by any of the movies we've had to watch for this show in a long, long time. I really,
Interesting.
I was really incredibly impressed. And we talk sometimes on Quest about a movie really pulling on your balls, right? And we see that happen literally in this film, which is quite an uncomfortable sequence, in my opinion. A nice little, kind of heavy-handed but nice symbolic moment also. But what I want to say on that front is that in the Questian sense, we usually mean that to say that a film is full of tension. And I think what this film does better than many that I've watched in a long time is evoke tension. I think that the score is amazing. I think that the sound design is amazing. And I think in conjunction with these performances, which I think are almost all fantastic, there's just this sense of dread I felt. And I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. I was incredibly, incredibly impressed by The Power of the Dog.
Okay. Well, I think I find myself a little bit more aligned with Tucker on this. I thought that the film hits all the base levels of a Best Picture nominee for sure, and all the base levels of one that could potentially end up being the winner. But I was a little. I think I agree with Tucker in its understatedness. It kind of felt a little long and a little dragging in the first half, but then as the second half, as it ramped up, it became a lot more interesting to me, and the characters were interacting in interesting ways. But I found myself being fairly confused and not really having a great sense of what was like going on and where the film was going towards the beginning of it. And I think that I want to talk about the thematic, material in the film and some of the subtextual leanings of it, but it wasn't all moving towards this like cohesive whole in my mind, all of the different elements. And so while I think it's very beautifully made, of course shot in New Zealand, beautiful, beautiful vistas that look more impressive than real life Montana does. I think the story left a little bit lacking, and I'm just gonna say it. Benedict Cumberbatch as our lead, as a Western lead.
He's fine.
He's not great, is what I'm gonna say.
Let's start with old Benedict Cumberbatch.
Okay.
There we go. Well, let's get all the name jokes off our chest.
Why would you ever pronounce his name properly? It's so much more fun just to fuck it up.
Yeah.
I actually agree with Timo. That's why I said that I thought the performances were almost all fantastic. And I think that Benedict has some really nice moments in this film. But I think that he goes too far. There's too much of him on the screen sometimes. Not only when he's running naked through a river, but when he's really emoting to an extent where it feels almost theatrical in the sense of we're watching a performance on the stage, right?
Yeah.
I think combined with the accent he tries to put on, which I think is effective for the most part, but rings a little bit hollow when you know how Benedict Cumberbatch actually sounds. I think that in a film that does feel very subdued, I think to its benefit, he didn't feel that way, but not in a way that felt like it had a purpose. It just felt like he was giving maybe 5 to 15% too much sometimes, and I found that to be a little bit jarring.
He might have been going for that Oscar a bit too hard.
That's exactly kind of
And
how
you know what? It's kind of paying off for him because he's like in the top 2 or 3 for winning.
Well, aside from the obvious favorite for this year, yeah.
That's kind of how I think about his performance. It's like straddling this line between like overacting. I feel like it's saddling, he's riding around in between these two extremes. The idea that like I think it's because this is like a role and this is such a character that he's inhibiting. He's letting himself go a bit bigger and maybe a little more grandiose than that fits the real subtle nature of the film, and maybe moves into a little bit of a slightly out of control feel to his performance, at least for me, when he's really, really emoting like crazy. It works for the story, but I don't know if it makes for the greatest performance ever.
Yeah, there's clearly... I disagree with you, Abram, on saying that this doesn't feel like it has a story concept or story point to it. Like, I feel like there is a very clear direction here of he is so far and away the stick in the mud of the cast, both in terms of being point of conflict for essentially everyone, but also he feels alienated from everyone. He all these things set him apart, and he is also, I think, on a subtextual level, increasing this grandioseness to cover up his repressed sexuality and this history that he doesn't want getting out, and filling this role of Bronco Henry, like trying to be the crazy macho asshole that he puts it on, and I can see what they're going for. But frankly, I thought that the character was pretty interesting. His performance didn't necessarily wow me. I think he sticks out from that regard in terms of I was pretty impressed by everyone else. Him being in the top, not the number one, but top running of Best Actor of the Year, I'm like, I don't quite see that from a personal perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see, because initially when I was watching the film, I'm like, I like the writing a lot more than I like the performances themselves. But I think, I mean, I just like him. I think all the actors, including Benedict Cumberbatch, live up to the writing that did Campion write this? I should have.
Yeah, she
head.
adapted it from the
it's
book
adapted
or
from a
play or
book.
whatever the hell.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah, she is the writer on this, along with Thomas Savage. But yeah, I really do think that I think everyone lives up here. I think Tucker's right that his sort of over the topness that I didn't necessarily feel. I mean, he's certainly more emotive than everybody else, I would say, but that is because he's putting on this facade of like the super macho cowboy who's he's lassoing folks and he's shooting barbs at people that he doesn't like, and he's basically
he doesn't like anyone.
He doesn't like anyone, exactly.
And I think
he
that's
alienates
part of the
himself
thing
from everyone.
Is that he's alienating himself so much that it kind of does feel like he's got a very strong note to his character, because for a lot of the movie's runtime, he's acting pretty similarly to almost everyone in the cast all the time. When you get to the end, he starts getting a little obviously more nuanced and acting differently to different situations. But I think maybe that's where the overbearingness of his performance come in, is because he is slinging those barbs and acting all macho in almost every situation, even when he's like by himself sometimes.
Yeah, but I just think that it works for this, and I think he does have some moments of where he's a bit he approaches the role with a bit of a lighter touch, where, well, ironically, in the scene where he's really gripping something really hard, which is the scene in which I think it's the scene where he's cleaning Bronco Henry's saddle, which is I think it's after George and Rose are consummating their marriage in the room next to him, and he's very obviously sexually frustrated by this and socially frustrated by this, by his his role in the house being challenged by George's new wife. And he goes out and cleans Bronco Henry's saddle in a clearly...
he cleans that saddle.
In a clearly sexual fashion. It is a sexual release for him, clearly, because, as we come to find out, him and Bronco Henry had something resembling a sexual relationship, we are led to believe. But I think he has moments like that where he's by himself, where he lets something a bit softer come through, like when he's in the, I guess it's more of a swimming hole in his cabinet to Narnia, as Tucker kept referring to it. He crawls through the cabinet to Narnia, and he's in that lake, and he's he's washing himself with the handkerchief that belonged to Bronco Henry. I think those are some moments where Benedict Cumberbatch uses a bit of a lighter touch in his performance here, and I think it all works across the board.
It's when he's being more, I think, when he's has more like action and more movement to do with like props and stuff, that he that element of his performance really comes out.
Yeah, I think the scene that just pushed it too far is when he comes back and realizes that Rose has sold all of the hides, and he's like losing his mind in the barn. And we come to the scene that'll be played in his Oscar reel. Yeah, and you feel it. I just think that there are moments here where the sort of subtlety that you're talking about, Tanner, which I completely agree with, just sort of falls away, and it becomes British man bug-eyed doing his Western accent. You know,
I should say I can get on board with the whole accent thing because it's really just like a slight twist of his Doctor Strange from nowhere USA accent, you know, that he does, where Doctor Strange is like a New Yorker or whatever, but he just has like an American accent. I'm Doctor Strange. What's going on here?
What I'd like to talk about next, actually, because Tucker touched on it a little bit, is sort of just the plot, how we move throughout the storyline. Because, like I said, I knew nothing about the movie, but as soon as we have him like trying to take a lot of presents at the table and he's burning the rose, I knew immediately he is gay. He's hyper projecting his masculinity. He's gonna go after
Peter.
He's gonna go after what's the kid's name again? I forget.
Peter.
He's gonna go after Peter. Mm-hmm. I kind of understood immediately what the narrative was, and I think I love the ending of the film, which I'm going to talk about, but I kind of knew how we're going to track throughout the film. I don't actually think that on a plot level, the movie is that compelling. I think it's kind of sort of an archetypal narrative, but I think what's effective about it is the way that it's told. It's the filmmaking and the editing. That's really, for me, what conveys the strength of the film, because, at least in my opinion, until we get to Peter's ultimate deception of
I don't know his name.
Phil. That I started to really feel hooked by the plot line. It was more of the subtextual material and the sort of filmmaking elements that carried me through, I think.
I hate to do this to you, Abram, but I think I knew that Phil was gay far before that scene happened.
Get fucked.
Yeah, how about that?
Whoa, owned.
I knew he was gay before we started the movie because I knew the plot of this movie before we started it. So
I didn't know the plot. Okay. I myself has been owned.
Yeah.
The natural cycle of things, to own and to be owned. But yeah, I think that the story for me, I kind of like to think about this, all the different sections in the film and how it's broken up into these like little, almost self-contained, but not really self-contained, you know, the enumerated bits of the film, and how the last one is the chapters, and the last chapter is far longer than the rest of them. I don't know. Does that affect how you guys view the film and view the story at all, and how it's broken up into those, or is it just kind of a moot point?
I honestly see it as more of just a through-line plot. I couldn't tell you what happens in any particular chapter, because I did view this as one whole chunk. I mean, I remember that the real action of the film, which I'm sure we'll get to you guys' issues with, you know, the sort of meandering nature of its first half. The real action of the film kicks in chapter 4. When Peter returns to the ranch from medical school, I believe, is where he's going, and yeah, I think that's the only like sticking point, like pin, like, oh, this happens in chapter 4. But as for the rest of it, I really view this as a through line complete plot that doesn't really matter if it's broken into chapters or not for me.
Yeah, the chapter thing, it pretty much only denotes when, hey, a relatively significant period of time has elapsed between this sequence and this sequence, and it's like pressing chapter select on a DVD. Like, it really doesn't impact the pacing of the film that much, and frankly, it's neither here nor there. I really don't think that's a very important element. It does make it feel like, okay, we're telling a literary story. Yeah. You're even putting chapter numbers, like, boom, chapter 2. And I'm like, all right, yeah, this is kind of book-like. But I think the fact that chapter 4 does twist the film on its head tonally, and ramping up the plot does certainly make it feel a little bit strange that we have most of the film take place in chapter 4/5. I think there's another chapter inserted somewhere in there, but you don't really feel it too much. But then the first 3 are kind of just set up for chapter 4, for that action to finally start taking place, which is where I think my problems with the pacing of the film come in, is that I'm totally happy and engaged watching the first 3 chapters of this film, but they're not particularly unique, and I think that's why it takes to chapter 4 for me to be like, okay, of course, I see where this is going, but I'm finally able to grab onto something here that I kind of feel like I haven't seen before, even if that's not necessarily the case. But finally, the intrigue is getting going. There's setup for intrigue for that first 45, 50 minutes. But then, okay, here we go. We can finally start getting into it.
But I think, and this is maybe more of a pacing discussion, that I think there is a lot of plot that unfolds in those first three chapters that is greatly important. We get the setup of Rose versus Phil, and how Phil is really psychologically torturing Rose, who ends up probably being, his main point of attack, even though initially it seems like Peter, though, he gets to escape off to medical school. Rose is stuck here with this man who loathes her and is psychologically abusing her in various ways, forcing her to become an alcoholic through all of his abuse. And we juxtapose that with George and Rose, of course, and we get to understand a bit more of the power dynamics at work here. We get the scene where George and Phil's parents show up to the ranch, and we get a bit more about their past, that they were college boys out east or something like that. And the governor shows up as well, and we really understand Phil's sort of disdain for authority and any reminder of his past life that wasn't him being a super cool cowboy guy. But
yeah, I have to say I really never found the pacing to be an issue, which is a rare thing for me to say about almost any movie, because I get quickly bored when I watch a lot of films, frankly. I dropped a glue stick. Sorry, audio listeners. Sorry,
the fact that a man is using a glue stick in the year of our Lord 2022 and he's not in elementary school art class, that's a worrisome sign.
I like to take a bite of it between homework assignments.
That's a great point.
But I think what's effective about the film is it sort of establishes a sense of claustrophobia in that first hour. The ways that and Tanner, I love the scene when the governor and the parents come over. The uncomfortable nature of that exchange when they're just talking and the conversation is so shallow.
Yeah.
Whereas Phil, I'm not going to drink George's concoction. There's just this gut feeling that I think the first hour of the film evokes, where everybody is trapped here, and it's Rose playing the piano and then Benedict shredding on the banjo.
Oh yeah,
that's a great moment. Yeah.
The
God, that's so rude.
Rude.
I actually really love how the film is very slow, because as I was saying, the plot is not, I don't want to call it thin, but it's very basic. There's really one major point of action, which is the murder of Phil, but we don't even learn that was a murder until afterwards. It's more about, I think, the ways that the film makes you feel about the interactions happening, and the fact that we take so much time to just be on this ranch, to me, is really, really effective, and why I kind of couldn't get the movie out of my head, because I couldn't get away from these characters.
Sure.
I like the point that you're making there, Abram. To me, the whole time that we spend on the ranch, when we, in a film, kind of like the one that we talked about on the main stage of Quest for the Bestest last week.
Which we won't talk about too much here, don't worry.
No, I'm just saying that that in that film we talked a lot about the place as a character, and I think that there is some sort of element here where the place is trying to be a character. But for me, the beginning, the first, let's say little more than a third of the film feels like a lot beyond the initial exposition, I should say. That little bit there before chapter 4, before we get the return of what's his name, Peter.
Yep.
It feels like a lot of moments that are working to build this atmosphere that is, it's very atmospheric, it's very evocative. It makes you, I think it definitely makes you feel, but to me, it still doesn't go a whole lot. It doesn't go anywhere in regards to the larger plot, And so that beginning part, while I think I am, like Tucker, engrossed, I'm watching the film, I'm paying attention, and it doesn't do anything to make me not want to watch the film. I just think that the way the plotting of the first half doesn't necessarily end up with me feeling like this, kind of like this slow burn build until the end. It's like we've got some stuff here, some context for a while, and then we have some story for a while.
Exactly.
And if I could have the story starting in the context and then boom, blows up in the end with this murder, that would have improved my feeling on the plotting storyline of the film.
Yeah, it's just interesting that the film is from a conflict perspective, I would say, pretty imbalanced. Like there's obviously a lot more going on in that last chapter in terms of the way that Peter's Peter's return upsets the flow of what's going on there. And it is. I just feel like there's so much that happens at the beginning that feels only like setup to get to what ultimately ends up happening. Where I feel the real story of the film is the relationship between Phil and Peter. Like I was like, I know this is going to happen. I'm just waiting for it to happen. Yeah, I understand he's rude. I understand he's torturing Rose. I understand George is gone. But all of that just is like, yep. Okay, when are we finally gonna get the ball rolling? And for me, that felt like it took a little too long. While I understand the film is going for an understated nature, I feel like that can sometimes feel like the burn is a little too slow.
Sure. I mean, I can see that. I just think that everything that this film does is really engaging in how it uses these, each scene in itself feels unique. It doesn't feel like we're going over the same material to me. Even if we're establishing some of the same themes and the same character traits, we do it in different and interesting ways.
Yeah, sure.
So I didn't really feel that, and when Peter comes back, it really feels like, okay, now the dread has set in. We've established that Phil is this tyrannical ranch head or whatever that is exerting his control over everything. But now we get Peter back, and especially after Peter and this gets into some differences in how you can read the film, which Tucker and I had the discussion about after we finished watching it,
which we'll definitely get into.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get into it right here. For me, is that I feel like after Peter sees Phil in the watering hole by himself, bathing himself with Bronco Henry's handkerchief, I think that Phil, he really takes on he becomes basically a predator for Peter. I feel, he sees Peter as a volatile object that he needs to control, much like everything else on the ranch. So he's like, okay, I get the feeling that Peter is gay. I mean, I've been making fun of him for that for a while now. What's everyone smiling at? What's going on here?
I just sent wait, so no ranch head in the chat.
Okay, all right. I was like, did I say something wrong?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Getting the train back on the tracks here. I feel that Phil, after that scene, is very much like, okay, I'm going to make use of Peter's sexuality, something that him and I have in common, but I feel I need to repress because it makes me less of a man. And I can control Peter using this. I can give him the attention and sort of turn him against his mother, because he reads Peter as the same as him, and ultimately Peter is not. He thinks that Peter is afraid of his sexuality. He feels ashamed of it, and he feels that he needs to, become a real man's man like me. Where Peter is, really comfortable in that. He's comfortable in who he is, and we especially see that once he returns from medical school, when he's walking through that camp of cowboys who are, making fun of him, and he strides up to the tree, and I don't know what he does.
Looks at the birds.
Looks at the bird, and he's like, that's a bird, all right. And he's turns around.
Good bird watching for me today. And then turns around.
I think that Peter is really interesting as the real mastermind of the film once he returns from medical school. I think he's always knowing that Phil is sort of grooming him and setting him on this path. But ultimately, he has a plan for how he's going to kill Phil, because he knows what Phil's been doing to his mother, and he's going to enact that no matter what Phil does. And I think at the end, when he says that, oh, I have some leather that you can use to finish this rope, Phil starts to soften a little bit. He's like, oh, maybe I was wrong for doing this to this kid for so long, but that murder plan's already in action. And Phil's putting the final chess piece into play. And I think that's what makes the whole story so interesting, but especially as we've been talking about that latter chapter 4 and 5. But yeah, I'd like to know what you guys think. I talked for a while there.
Yeah, Well, I'm about to make an equally long point, which is you've unearthed the crux of why I think this movie is really effective in my mind. Okay. So I have to walk through this. I think it actually under that pacing question. I think the point of, in my opinion, spending so long prior to the return of Peter is to establish the sense of dread where Phil is a real danger. Like, I got the feeling that he was a real threat to Rose, and by extension, a real threat to Peter. So when he comes back, there's this, in my mind, continual ambiguity within what his actions are. Because I think there's this feeling that, as I felt for a lot of the film, that Phil viewed Peter as like a sort of externalization of himself, the part of him he needed to kill. And I legitimately thought that he was going to take Peter out to ride and then kill him
or whatever.
Yeah. And so I think the film kind of establishes this when he literally emasculates the bull as Peter is arriving. And I think that sort of visual language communicates that this is now going to happen to Peter too. And I think that then we see the scenes that pretty much overtly, again, visually establish Phil as being gay when we go through the Narnia cupboard and we're looking through the box and everything.
Yes.
And then there's a kind of shift of the dynamic where I'm no longer certain that Peter is going to die. I start to feel, is Phil now just trying? Does he see a new Bronco Henry? Does he actually have this sort of repressed and taboo relationship he's trying to fulfill? And you think that that's the case with the scene as they're passing back and forth the cigarette, and we learn about how Bronco Henry saved his life, whether that's literal or a sort of spiritual saving by them finally being together. We don't really know. There's that sort of level of ambiguity again. And then the ways that the plot finally clicks into place in a second, and these sort of small cues that you lose in this sort of dread of how does this relationship play out. The anthrax, the beautiful shot of Phil's hands in the water and his blood in the water with the, we know, anthrax laced cowhide. And then you just get a line of dialogue. He died, it was poisoning, it was anthrax, and it clicks. And all of a sudden, the entire power dynamic that we, as the viewer, have set up in our head is flipped on its head, because suddenly it's Peter who was there and always on his mother's side. He was always there to kill the man who was killing her. And I think that the ways that this plays out in this really circuitous manner is completely masterful.
I agree. I totally agree.
I think those are both quite excellent readings from you too. And just like what Tanner was talking about just was reminding me of the first lines of voiceover in the film. It was like, you know, what would a man, I don't remember the lines exactly, but like a man should do anything to save his mother, and essentially setting Peter up for that at the very beginning of the film. And then there's all this contextual stuff they were talking about, and so you almost forget about it by the time it is there, and you're like, and then when I see him finally commit the murder, and like you say, Abram, it all clicks into place, and like everything is set out straight, and I understand what has happened. I immediately think back to those first lines.
Yeah, I absolutely think that Peter is the star of the show here. And I think maybe that's also why Benedict Cumberbatch's performance whelmed me. No over or under, just completely whelmed me. I do feel that Peter is the most interesting piece of the puzzle here by a significant margin. And the way that he is a more overtly effeminate gay man in a time where that was completely taboo. And we see that played out through Phil's and completely repressed sexuality. All that is fascinating. The way that Peter interacts with everyone else and is close to his mother and is able to bring Phil down is fascinating. And actually, and this is where Tanner and I disagreed, we're sort of establishing here as a point of contention, but not a point of disagreement, but not in any good or bad way, is I actually view Phil's arc in the last section of the film after Peter sees him in the lake, and Peter realizes he's gay, and Phil realizes he's watching him because he's gay, and like there's a moment there, and what I see that as is Phil realizing that he has someone to connect to on this level, even if it's not entirely overt, and he starts to soften. He finally realizes he doesn't need to be completely repressed in this, and starts training up Peter as the next Bronco Henry, as the next him. And I think there is an interesting story there for Phil, where he is not being corruptive necessarily or maliciously corruptive to Peter in that last act of the film, but he's actually building a relationship with him, and he sees himself in him, and he wants to be kind, and he wants to teach him how to do these things because he knows that Peter has that capability. And then when Peter kills him, it actually, in my eyes, is a little more fascinating to get Peter being the malicious one and being a defensively, justifiably malicious, but that actually, first half of the film, holy shit, Phil is one of the biggest assholes I've ever seen in cinematic history. He's just so rude. He's shredding the banjo while Rose is trying to tinkle, tinkle, little star. But then it's really Peter that is the malicious one in the end. And Phil is actually kind of softening for that last third of the movie. And I find that to be a really interesting inverting of the power dynamic that entirely centers around Peter. And I think Phil being not entirely malicious, not entirely corruptive, is how I read the film, and I find that really interesting. Timo, Abram, do you agree? Do you disagree?
Yeah, hearing these two sides of the table, I might, because I like your analysis of like the power inversion and the who is malicious flipping in the film. But I feel that practically in the plot, Tanner's idea is more represented. So I'm like, analytically, I like Tucker's analysis more, but I think that it is less shown in the plot. So where do I stand in all that? I have yet to decide.
The reason I say that I would say that I feel mine is represented is because Rose takes a pretty significant backseat. When Peter returns home, we do see her pretty consistently, but we don't see her interacting with Phil. We don't see Phil continuing this driving force to probably ultimately kill Rose. Those scenes pretty much entirely dissipate. So in my eyes, he has stepped away from that because he is softening. He is attaching to Peter in a genuine way rather than trying to corrupt him in sort of some dark way.
Yeah.
Well, the point of difference there is that I really like your reading, Tucker, and I'd be interested to go back to this film eventually and sort of try and watch it through that lens. But the point of difference there with Rose, who I want to talk about Cody Smith-McPhee and Jesse Plemons and Kirsten Dunst. There's a lot of great performances in here that I want to talk about. But the point of difference there is that obviously I think that is Benedict Cumberbatch, knowing that the one last key that he was missing to really, drive Rose into the dirt psychologically and physically, her drinking is affecting her physical health, is to steal Peter away from her. And I think that's what it is. But I like I said, I think your reading is really neat too.
Neat.
Yeah, it's neat.
Abram?
Yeah, I just feel like the film in the first half doesn't give you a reason to want to give him the benefit of the doubt. And for me, the sudden shift in his tenor towards Peter reads, from my perspective, as malicious, as intentional on the behalf of Phil.
I agree when that first happens entirely.
Sure. But I have a hard time divorcing myself from the sort of mood that's established by the first half of the film.
Sure.
Even though I certainly, as I was saying, there's an ambiguity there, and there's certainly an undercurrent of affection, whether it's being weaponized by either party there.
Sure.
That sort of underpins the entire relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's
part of the fun of discussing this film is I think Tanner's probably right. Frankly, I think mine is a more interesting reading of the film, and maybe we can ring a ding ding, call up Jane Campion and be like, hey, what do you really mean? Or maybe we could read the book. But that's not going to happen.
that will never happen.
No. But speaking of, I'd like to run through the wins and noms here a second, if I may.
The noms.
I
guess it was no wins.
Just the noms. Yeah, I'm so used to saying the wins and noms, but just the nominations now, because I think that there is, this is an avenue to talk about a lot of the other aspects we haven't talked about yet. So, this film has two actors in the supporting actor category, Cody Smith-McPhee and Jesse Plemons, who I both really, really liked in this. We have a nomination for Jane Campion for adapted screenplay. I think whoever I said earlier, that Savage guy, I think he might be the original author when I said that.
He's the book.
Okay, so yeah, just Jane Campion adapting
That's,
this.
by the way, that's the exact same reason why William Shakespeare is credited as many film writers, even though that is categorically false. It is also categorically true.
Yeah, think about it. We also have Campion for Best Director. I think this is a very well directed film.
The first time a woman has ever been nominated for Best Director twice.
Exactly. Yeah, historic for Jane Campion here. Obviously, this is nominated for Best Picture. We have Best Actor in a Leading Role for Bumberdon Cumberdon. We have Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Kirsten Dunst. We have a nomination for Production Design, for Sound, for Cinematography, for Editing, and for Original Score. Johnny Greenwood.
And we're starting at the top here, by the way. This is the most nominated film of the entire show.
12
So it's all downhill from here, boys.
Yeah. 12 nominations for The Power of the Dog. Any thoughts on any of those categories and elements of the film that were nominated, or ones that weren't?
I have some thoughts on the cinematography of this film because it was filmed in New Zealand. I mentioned it earlier. I think even though the film is like very beautiful a lot of the time, I feel like it rests a little bit much on these sweeping vistas in its cinematography. I think when you dive into the nitty-gritty of how the shots are composed, how the characters are lit, I am a little bored by it in that I think that there is a lot you can do with interesting. I was really looking at the faces and really dialing into how are these scenes lit, looking at Tanner right now. He's got a little bit of shine on one side of his face and
I do.
And there's some fill on the other one.
I don't like that light being there, but I do.
I like that light being there because it adds interest, and there are no lights like that in the film. It's
a pretty flatly lit movie, for sure.
It's a very flatly lit movie, and so to me, I'm like, okay, if I know the film is very subtle, and I know that the story is subtle, the acting is supposed to be by and large subtle, even the aspect of it being a Western is very subtle. It's not like, rootin' tootin'.
Yeah, exactly.
Western films. And so to me, I have a hard time discerning if it's like a choice to make it all look like that, or if it wasn't a choice and this kind of flat lighting on all the characters all the time is just there. So I don't know. It kind of slightly tilts into the negative for me, but not a huge amount.
Sure.
I have to say I think it's deliberate because I think that there are some staggeringly beautiful shots in this film, and I don't think that the level of artistry that gets you the shot of the blood hitting the golden ferns or the hands in the bowl of the rawhide or those incredibly tight shots of the rope against Phil's leg thing. I don't think you get shots like that in a film that is not conscious about every other visual choice it's making. And I find that the ways that this sort of cinematic mediation of the narrative fades into the more natural cinematography to be quite effective for the narrative that we're telling here. I think it's quite a stunning film visually.
I think those close-up shots, like you're talking about with the blood on the wheat, the golden, that golden color with the super dark red. That's like a wallpaper level shot right there. That one is truly excellent.
I really, you can see that being like pretty loaded on Max as like one of the selectable wallpapers that can rotate through. But I really hope they don't do that because that's blood and that's nasty.
That's gross. That is gross. But yeah, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tucker.
I was gonna say I disagree with Timo. I think the flat lighting in the indoor sequences and stuff like that is totally fine. It doesn't push me in either particular direction. However, what does push me in any particular direction are those close-up shots, are those environmental shots, which the film is hanging its hat on, and I think for good reason because they're phenomenal. And what the film does in a really interesting way is drain a lot of color from the world. I think that shot of the of the blood on the wheat is actually one of the most colorful shots in the entire film. But I think that's deliberate because what this film does is show the beauty in this sort of gray to brown scale palette. You've got, for the most part, gray skies, sort of a beige ground grass, dark brown buildings and walls and and gray, brown, beige costumes on everyone all the time.
Like your shirt,
and I
Tucker.
think that's
It's pretty much
yeah,
the-
earth tones.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think it really works because of that. It's very unique. It's not drained of color because they don't know that color exists, but they're like, no, this is a deliberate color palette, and I love that.
Yeah. As I told Tucker, I just have a soft spot for when films capture the beauty of the American West, even though this is not the American West. But it tricked me. I did not know it was shot in New Zealand until I looked up some trivia for this film, which I hope to get to in a tidge. But yeah, I totally agree. I don't have a lot to add outside of what you guys said. Beautiful looking film. I would use a number of these shots as wallpapers for my laptop. How about that?
Hey,
You can.
I mean, pretty
Well,
good.
actually, there's actually not a ton of high quality screenshots of this movie out there. I'm sure we'll get more now that the movie's more popular, but you can do it eventually.
Sure, eventually. I would like to talk about some of the supporting performances here because this film does have 3 nominations in those categories. And I think I'd like to start with Cody Smith-McPhee. He is the current favorite to win the Best Supporting Actor category.
Over J.K. Simmons?
Over J.K. Simmons and being the Ricardos. Sorry, Tucker. Sorry. I know you're the one person in the world who loves that performance. He doesn't. No one does. That's a joke. But we talked about Peter quite a bit already. I just want to say some quick things I thought of while we were discussing Peter's character. I think that Cody Smith-McPhee and Peter as a character are interesting in a lot of ways that might have gone unnoticed. That I really only thought of when Tucker was bringing up how, he is sort of effeminate in a way that was obviously not very popular in society back in the 1920s.
Believe it or not.
Believe it or not. But I did have a question for you guys. Do we ever get an overt sort of for sure thing that Peter is gay? Am I just blanking on something here, or is it possible that he's not gay? He's just aware that Phil is, and he's using that to his advantage.
Well, I mean, the queer-coded nature of this character is so off the goddamn charts that I think you're kind of ridiculous for even assuming that a obvious, yes, okay, confirmation he's gay. I don't think that necessarily matters because it's not just that he's using it against Phil. We see him before he's even met Phil. And so I think that, I'm confused why he's even a question, frankly.
I mean, I don't know. I think it's mostly clear, and I think that is a pretty common reading. So I was just posing a question, But I did have a little note to add that I think that he does sort of play with this notion of him being effeminate and divorced from all the manly toughness of cowboy culture.
The usual goings on of the ranch.
The usual goings on, because we see him capture that rabbit, and we're like, oh, he's gonna have a little pet for the rest of the movie. But no, he's just cold and calculating. He's like, I caught this rabbit to cut it open and use as a learning tool, to dissect it for my own medical knowledge. And I think that's a really interesting moment that passed me by until I thought of it just during this review. That we think of Peter as this sort of softer character who uses a softer touch in his personal life, but no, he's cold and calculating. He'll cut open a rabbit that he just caught. He doesn't care.
He kills
Stab a
2
rabbit's
rabbits
neck.
in the course of the
Oh
film.
yeah, true.
It's because Phil makes him kill a rabbit later, and he's like, okay, and he just does it. And so
Yep.
that is the part that, maybe Tucker is right, that he is enticing Phil into this situation because
Thank you. I'll take the credit for that.
I was like, as I was watching, I think, okay, is he almost like on the, like, it feels, this is the wrong word, but like sort of psychopathic in his like total coldness towards killing these living, these rabbits, and the way that he is very unemotional about killing Phil in the end. So yeah, maybe there's something there. I will say about Cody Smith-McPhee is that, yeah, I think it's totally amazing performance from him. Probably my favorite performance in the film.
Yeah.
I think he is ultimately the anchor of the film in my mind, despite Benedict Cumberbatch being the top billing character.
Yeah, yeah. Abram, any thoughts on Cody? K-O-D-I, Cody?
Not really. I think he gives a really nice performance in the sense that I don't really think of it as performance. I find myself usually thinking about a performance when it goes too far, and that was the case with my friend Benedict. But no, I think he handles himself
Ben,
quite well. Yeah,
you
my
call
friend
him.
Ben. Yeah. But I think the character I want to talk about is Jesse Plemons' character.
Yeah.
Georgie, old timer you might call him.
I think, but I think Phil calls him a number of
Good
times.
Lord, he calls him that a lot of times.
Yeah, he does.
I think he's not in the movie enough. Coming into the review, my two main issues with it were both, I think Benedict goes a little bit too far sometimes, and I think that we just don't get enough Jesse Plemons. I think he gives a very good performance, and I think he's got a very compelling dynamic with basically everybody in the film. But for a lot of the film, he's out to town for the week, and I understand completely the function of his absence, but I just think that we lose a little bit by not having him more involved in the plot.
Yeah, he's certainly the one that feels the least involved because, of course, screen time wise, he totally is. But also in terms of, he's kind of the glue that holds all of the relationships together. But he also kind of, in my opinion, I think he does a totally solid job. But best supporting actor nomination, I don't really know if I feel that from him. But he fills a really interesting role because he's bouncing off of, in my opinion, more interesting characters. He is the brother of Phil. He's the more normal, less rude brother of Phil, and that makes them an interesting dynamic. But it also makes him the springboard for Phil to be an even bigger asshole. Him being the husband of Rose, but kind of just the nice boy husband of Rose, makes it feel like, okay, well, she's the interesting one that's not getting enough attention, but he's just kind of, he's there, or he's off to town, or he's back, and it's interesting, but not like insanely so. I think it is a fine job, but he's one of the just like on the board points of this movie. I don't think he's particularly positive or negative.
Sure.
He sets up the story, and that's his important
True.
point of as a character. And then he fades to the background.
But he sets up the story because he's a nice guy, and he sees a woman who's not having a good time, so he's going to sit there and be the waiter, and he's a nice guy.
Yeah, I think
A shoulder to cry on. You know how the phrase ends.
The adage.
I think that Jesse Plemons does do a good job here. I think he was a surprise nomination, and I think the Academy put him in just because, Jesse Plemons is probably one of the bigger names in Hollywood right now. He sort of arose from his early work in Breaking Bad, and I think they want to have that little. They want to be allowed to say Academy Award nominee Jesse Plemons.
Sure.
And we did that, ultimately when he becomes one of the biggest actors, when his career grows a little bit more. But talking about this film specifically, I think he does a great job. I really, really love the scene when him and Rose drive out to like the middle of nowhere at basically like the foot of that mountain, and they dance a little bit and they have a heart to heart. And he says, I just thank you for making sure that I'm not lonely anymore. Because I think that gets to the heart of a theme of this film is, Phil's lonely. That I feel like that at the very heart at the very heart of his character is his loneliness. That is the reason why he feels alone in his sexuality, in his relationships with others. He alienates himself from others because of that, and it's a self-defeating cycle is what Phil does of loneliness. And I think George is an interesting foil to that and into a lot of other aspects of Phil's character. And I think Jesse Plemons does that all really, really well. I also love him in the scene with the governor and his parents. I seen that Abram also said that he loved, and I totally agree. Because Jesse Plemons is very good at doing like very awkward social interactions because he has this way of delivering that's just like, it seems like he's never talked to a person before, and it's a real talent that he has. If you haven't, go watch the film Game Nights. It's a comedy from 2018, and he's a good, very strong straight man force in that because of that, he feels like an alien that these people are interacting with, and he feels the same in this. But he also has moments of softness, like in that scene with Rose.
I really quite like that scene with Rose, and it leads me into thinking about Kirsten Dunst's performance. What do you have to say about in that regard as we round out our four main actors in the film?
The husband and wife nominated duo, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah, they are married.
I believe they're not. I thought I heard they weren't married.
they have children at the very least. I think they're also married.
Well, they better be married.
Especially that we're living in 1920s Montana, I can tell you that much. But Rose, Kirsten Dunst, I really liked
Yes.
her as well. She comes to the forefront when George is gone a lot and Peter is gone,
Okay,
and
I'm wrong.
it is Phil versus Rose. It is Benedict Cumberbatch versus Kirsten Dunst. And if I may drop in a piece of trivia here, they were so deep in their roles in this character that they often didn't talk to each other while filming. While the cameras weren't rolling, they just wouldn't talk to each other. Maybe that's them staring a character. Maybe they actually don't like each other in real life. Who's to say? But I think Rose is great in the scene, where I think the Oscar scene for her will either be that scene with Jesse Plemons or the piano scene, because both are fantastic. Or maybe one of the scenes where she's, running, when she's, later in the stages of alcoholism and she's running around and trying to stop Peter from going out with Phil and stuff like that. She's great in all those scenes. I think she can do the over-the-top, the crying, no, Peter, come back, but she can also do the when Phil comes down the stairs playing the banjo aggressively at her, and she's just sort of stone-faced, but you can see that fear and that anger in her at the same time. I think she carries it all very, very well.
I think she plays a wreck beautifully. And Tanner, I think you're missing the most obvious Oscar scene is when she brings Peter into the bedroom and she's hammered and she's pouring the sugar on the table and drawing the stars in it and everything.
Yeah.
I think she does a really nice job of just unraveling on screen.
I think so too.
And it's not only just in her dialogue, it's in what I think is one of the most harrowing scenes when she's in the alley trying to drink the last dregs out of that bottle, and Phil is whistling at her and the camera's cutting back to the window and she can't quite see him, and then he peeks out and she's just physically falling apart. I really think that it is a stunning performance.
He whistles the song that she was practicing and then failed to play, and really, makes a fool of her and George in that scene with the governor and his parents. Yeah, that goes back to the psychological torture that Phil inflicts upon Rose in this.
I can confirm Jesse Plemons and Kirsten Dunst are married. I looked
There
it
you
up.
go.
I just command F to the Wikipedia page. They have been engaged since 2017, but I do not believe they've actually gotten married.
Oh no.
The fact checker has been
Detective
fact-checked.
Tucker.
Well, we'll get him to come on the show, and maybe we can do the ceremony
consummate
here on
their
BLB.
marriage.
Yeah, we can have the officiation.
We can officiate their marriage. We will not consummate their marriage, Tucker.
You gotta get a mind for comedy, Mr. Man.
That would make a good BLBS segment.
Oh, I see.
Consummating marriage? Question mark.
Officiating the Dunst Plemons wedding. But that's all I got here. I do have some further trivia. If you'd be so kind to let me drop this in here in a second.
Drop me with that trivia, man.
Sounds rather trivial.
To get into character for Phil Burbank, Benedict Cumberbatch didn't wash for almost 2 weeks at the outset of filming. He also started chain smoking. Although he had smoked in real life, he felt sick after each take when he was smoking hand rolled cigarettes, not store bought. He went so far with the chain smoking that he got nicotine poisoning 3 times.
Ugh.
He's committing to that role.
Yeah,
and Kirsten Dunst
committing to the bit, doing it for the gram, maybe a little bit too hard there, buddy.
Jake Gyllenhaal stood up and applauded when he heard that news about him not showering.
Yeah, just smelly and full of nicotine poisoning. Kirsten Dunst also got into her role she committed to her role. She learned to play. She apparently mastered 2 pieces on the piano, but they only used one, much to her chagrin.
And just
and
like in the movie.
Yeah. And we talked about how this film was filmed in New Zealand, and how Campion is the second woman to be nominated twice for Best Director.
The first woman to be nominated.
The first woman to be nominated twice, excuse me.
Yeah.
And it is her return, I was reading, after many years absent from having directed films.
Yeah, for sure.
I actually looked up Jane Campion a while ago because I was like, Power of the Dog, what is this movie I'm never going to watch? And I was procrastinating homework
Little
one
did you
day.
know.
And I was like, she had quite a rough patch of directing pretty poorly received films. So this seems like quite the resurgence for her. But I'm also stupid, and that might be incorrect.
Who's to say?
I just wanted to say, good
you might
job,
be
Jane.
stupid. Good job, Jane, all around. But yeah, anybody have any final thoughts on the power of the dog.
I have one final thought, and I touched on it before, but I just think that the sound design in this film is incredible. And I think that the score is incredible. And man, the fingers along the comb is an amazing motif throughout the film. When I'm talking about ratcheting tension, the sort of auditory landscape of the power of the dog, I think there's a lot to sell that for me. So I just wanted to shout that out.
Do they do Oscar reels for best sound? Because that'll definitely be in there.
They used to. Do they do it anymore? Will they announce my favorite award during the commercial break? Probably.
Yeah.
We'll see. But otherwise,
Isn't it your least favorite though? Because you wish it was 2.
I have
Yeah,
a
'cause
love-hate relationship with the Academy Award for Best Sound. It is at times amazing and at times horrible. So
Yeah.
we'll see what it is this year, I guess. Yeah,
Would you feel good/bad if this won best sound?
I think so. It didn't. You
You would feel good/bad.
I would feel
I
good
would
slash
feel
bad.
good/bad.
Last year we had amazing entries into the field. So I'm looking, I'm going to hold judgment on that until we've seen a couple more films.
Sure,
Because
of
last
course.
year we had films that were like driven by the sound as a story
Sound
thing.
of Metal, yeah.
Yeah, which I love to see. And Mank.
And Mank.
The ye olde great sound rant from that episode.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that this film measures up. I think it's totally bar level. It's above bar level, and like Abrams says with the comb, there are a lot of unique sounds in it. But I want to purview the field because unlike Tanner, I've seen none of these movies, so I'm just getting to them all for the first time here. Well, I've intentionally not watched them. I was like, yeah, that's getting nominated. We'll have to watch it for the show.
We'll talk about the film that should and will win Best Sound when we review my favorite movie of last year.
Yeah, we'll get to it eventually. Don't
Which,
you worry.
much to the chagrin of half of this panel, was nominated for Best Picture.
I think it's. I didn't expect that it wouldn't be, and the 4-letter name of this film, which will not be said, apparently, where it's taboo to say the word.
Belfast.
But Belfast.
Nice 4-letter name. Yeah.
June. Should we give this film a score?
Let's give it a score.
Yeah.
I kind of have a pretty good educated guess of where it's going to go on the list after our score. So this is just for the procedure of it. But
Timo's being kind of wacky because this list doesn't exist yet.
Yes, it does.
this film, if you could imagine it, will go at first place right now. A hot take. That's where it's going to go.
I have a number plug in. Somebody didn't open the spreadsheet though. I
Nope.
can see.
And somebody's trying to find it. Where the hell is it?
Someone's really hoping that we pad for time.
Somebody needs to open
No,
up the
I
quest
actually
ranking
don't-
and click.
yeah.
Somebody needs to open up the quest ranking.
Oh,
and then
I've
on
seen the bottom.
of the screen,
Yep,
click
yep,
on
forgot about that.
2022 Oscar noms.
Yep.
Oh,
There you go.
There we go.
How's it going? All right.
Alrighty.
All right, 3, 2, 1, boom.
Boop, 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 boop. Calculating.
Ding. We've got a score. It is 8.7. So that's up there. I mean, they're nominees. They're Best Picture. So, we shall see where it stacks up to other films. As of now, The Power of the Dog goes as the #1 Best Picture of 2022.
Number 1, baby. That's right.
But the point breakdown, starting from the top, Abram gave it a 9.5. Tanner gave it a 9.3. Tucker gave it an 8.1. And I gave it a 7.8. So I need to actually give it a 7.9 so that the point fall is more symmetrical and perfect.
No.
Yes.
I can't change the score now. That would be illegal. I would get hunted down by the Court of Quest. So
True.
I believe because there's only so many films and there's all kinds of craziness going on with release schedules and where we can watch them. No random spin wheel. We're gonna take fate into our own hands. We're gonna, man is created by
like a rope.
We're gonna grab it by the reins to
Grab it by the
as
reins.
cowboys might.
or
We're gonna grab it like
by-
an anthrax covered rope.
Yeah, really just get it in that wound. Get it in those
Yeah,
open wounds that you guys
ooh,
have on your
yeah.
palms.
What
Rub
film
it
are
in
we?
there.
What film are we
Can
gonna
cows
watch
still
next
give
time?
you anthrax? This is more important, Tino. When he got anthrax from the cow, I was like, that's only something. I thought that's like a man-made thing.
I did too. I don't know the science behind Anthrax, but to answer your question, Timo, about what movie we'll be watching next, to not further delay this episode of Quest, we will be watching Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley next, which can be found streaming on HBO Max and Hulu, for any of you who'd like to watch along. And yeah, we just talked about a GDT film quite recently for our regular series of Quest, but he came back with Nightmare Alley, a remake. One of the two remakes that were nominated for Best Picture this year.
I was hoping you were going to say Pacific Rim.
No,
Yeah, my hopes
Pacific
up
Rim.
with GDT.
2013's Pacific Rim was not nominated for Best Picture this year.
Greatest snub at the Oscars. Well,
Yeah.
I think it's going to be super interesting. You know, we're not comparing this movie to The Shape of Water, which won a couple years ago, but I feel like, you know, I'm not going to be able to help myself. I think that that's going to be super fun to compare them, even if it doesn't really fall into our ultimate ranking of the film. And, you know, this progression as a director, we're going to see it. Going to see the next. Did he make a film in between?
No, this is his follow up to The Shape of Water.
Okay, so that's
a
pretty big to
sequel.
have two
not true.
nominated films. The Shape of Water 2. It's Square is what it's called.
Finally, the answer that we've all been waiting for. But yeah, Nightmare Alley. I've seen it already. I'm excited to rewatch it.
Okay.
I didn't think this movie was that popular or that well received.
I don't think it did very well at the box office.
It was a surprise Best Picture nominee as well.
Big surprise. Gigantic surprise.
Will we be surprised by the film? Will we not? Who knows? Find out next time on The Quest for the Bestest 2022 Best Picture Nominees podcast TV show. That's what we're doing here.
Side quest.
It's a little
Side
side
quest.
quest. We are rambling off. We'll be hanging out with all of these films, all 10 of them, until the ceremony. So keep your watches tuned. We're going to do 2 episodes a week. It's going to be a great time, a wild ride. Thank you guys for joining me, talking about this movie, The Power of the Dog, and we will see you next time. Peace.